So the Aryan race theory was a concept that came into being sometime in the 19th century and matured in the early part of 20th century. It was a monstrosity that was concocted by the German academicians to project the facade of supremacy of the white race, specifically the white race of the Germanic type. In reality, it was a construct that was created to paper over the socio-political and religious insecurities that the German people were feeling at that time. Unfortunately, the concept did not confine itself to being just an academic construct. As we know from history, the Nazi regime picked it up, weaponized it to devastating effect, the brunt of which was borne by the Jewish people and the Roma people. Understanding its origin, its construct, and its consequences is as important today as it ever was, because monsters like this, once created, may go dormant for a period of time, but they never completely die. We have seen this ideology rear its ugly head from time to time over the last 70 years, long after the Nazi regime had been sent to its rightful place. Today, we are witnessing the reemergence of it in our own times and our own context. The monikers they use may be different. The constructs they may appear a little bit different, but let's make no mistake about it, the DNA is not terribly different. Dr. Peggy Shapiro, she's a child of Holocaust survivors. She was born in the displaced persons camp at Landsberg, Germany. She was one of the founding members and past president of the Association of Children of Holocaust Survivors in Chicago, as well as a founder of the International Second Generation Association, which was founded in 1982. Peggy retired from City Colleges of Chicago, where she was the chairperson of the Foreign Language Department at Harold Washington College and professor for 31 years. She was awarded the City of Chicago's Kathy Osterman Prize for Excellence in Teaching and honored as a distinguished professor of the city colleges. I now invite Dr. Peggy Shapiro to talk about the Jewish experience and how she finds parallels in the Hindu experience today. Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for inviting me to this really important conversation that we need to have together. If you'd like to, if you could move to the next slide, I'm going to make this, start with this a little less academic and very personal. Because ultimately, these concepts affect human beings. So here's a picture of my family, a little bit. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. On the very left are my parents, who were teenage survivors of the Holocaust. They lost their homes, their friends, their families, even their names were taken from them for almost 4 years under brutal conditions that I don't think we can fathom. My mother and father were only numbers, expendable, not human. The rest of the photos are the sum total of all the photos I have of my family. I never met them. There were 182 members of my family who were killed in the Holocaust, and I only have these cherished few because it was forbidden for a Jew in a concentration camp to have even one photo. The enemy meant not only to destroy us, but to erase the memory that we existed as human beings. And when I was a child, I heard my parents and other survivors use the words "never again." It was their pledge never to have their identities in the hands of an enemy, never again to let the evil specter of anti-Semitism rise and consume our future as it has our past. And I believe their pledge. But as you said, anti-Semitism is irrational. It's embedded in the DNA. When we think it's eradicated, it mutates. It's not a static disease. It adapts to new environments and circumstances and invades neighboring organs, causing eventually metastasis. And so, as was referred, it is the longest hatred. My story, as I tell it now, may sound familiar to you because as Hindus and Jews have traveled along similar roads. And I'm going to briefly overview this war against the Jews, how it defames and distorts the religion, as we saw a little bit of, how the Aryan race theory arose in our perspective, and how it was used to spread outrageous propaganda, turned lethal, lingers today, and then what we can do to defeat it. So if you please turn to the next slide. It didn't start with Luther. The early Christian church had a Jewish problem. The very presence of Jewish people in the world continuing believed in the faithfulness of God, with our covenant with God, our relationship. How could they explain Jews away? We were an inconvenient presence. So there were a variety of techniques. They blamed Jews for the crucifixion of Christ, of course, omitting the notion that he was a Jew. And because if you kill God, you're certainly due for punishment. And it was an excuse for this supposed deserved punishment of Jews not to accept Christianity. I understand that Hinduism has also been misunderstood, misrepresented, and maligned. Thousands of Hindus, as Jews, have been forcibly converted or subjected to suffering because they rejected conversion. And I noticed even in your last presentation, the analogy of Brahmins to rabbis with some of the similar anti-Semitic tropes of being mendacious and power hungry. We'll look at the next slide. When the Enlightenment came, the Jews of Europe somehow sighed a sense of relief. This period of the Dark Middle Ages of discriminating and killing us and expelling us because of our religion, well, now it will give way to a secular humanism, the Enlightenment of the 18th century. There were new exciting ideas of science over religion. But the confidence in science unleashed an anti-Semitism that wasn't based on religion, but on race and genetics. It had nothing to do with Jewish religion. It had to do with the Jew. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection. Darwin's theory is often described as survival of the fittest. Well, there were social Darwinists who misapplied Darwin's theory of natural selection to socially constructed human groups. They used this theory to suggest that some humans were superior to other humans. And as the Jewish philosopher Heinrich Heine phrased it, they do not hate my God, they hate my nose. And the differences between the so-called races were justified by modern science. Anti-Semites were convinced that science also justified their discrimination against Jews. You'll see this image of 1938 compares German youth with Jewish youth. And it says, from the face speaks the soul of the race. And so we have racial anti-Semitism, which holds that physical and intellectual differences exist between groups, and that these differences are biological, permanent, and irreversible. We can go to the next slide. And I have learned a great deal about the Aryan race theory from our previous speaker, but as we said, it started with an analysis of language. You had the Indo-European language and the Indo-Germanic and Germanic peoples, And then you had Semitic languages. It started as, at the very beginning, as a language classification. But at the same time, European scholars also identified Jews and Arabs as Semites. And then they said there are Semitic languages. But later, this linguistic category was reinterpreted incorrectly to define ethnicity as race. So they posited that you had Aryans who were superior to other people. This racial use of the term promoted a widespread but false concept of the existence of an Aryan race. This concept of Aryan was misdirected from Hinduism, and a European theorist invented an Aryan race and imagined they had to make a story around it. That an Aryan race, which migrated to India, struggled to maintain its racial purity, and even associated with that, with the caste system that of racial superiorities. So they had to make a story up from scratch. And from the beginnings of the Nazi Party in the 1920s, Adolf Hitler and the ideologues of the National Socialism promoted this concept. They adapted, manipulated, radicalized this unfounded belief in the Aryan race. And Nazis used this official concept to support the idea that Germans belong to the master race. And specifically, the non-Aryans applies foremost to Jews, but also who were the greatest threat to German society, but also to the Roma and Sinti, the Gypsies. And this was, we had the first legislation. So it went from a theory to action, from words to action, we had legislation. In the early years following Hitler's appointment as chancellor in 1933, the Aryan was used in various public life in Nazi Germany. And the first major law to revoke the rights of Jewish citizens was the Law for the Restoration of Professional Civil Service in 1933. It's Aryan paragraph, and it was the first legal formulation to exclude Jews. It said civil servants who are not of Aryan descent are to be retired. Now, other organizations, including private, educational, religious ones, followed suit, including this Aryan clause for membership. And on the left, you see a certificate of Aryan descent. It was from 1936. So in Germany, people enlisted the help of genealogists to prove their Aryan racial status. And then once a time-consuming research was completed, then they could be classified officially as Aryans. And if we go to the next slide. Now, what happens when you're not part of the Aryans? The caption over the left one says Satan. It's from Der Stürmer, very popular German publication, 1943. Got it from one of the propaganda archives. And here you see a Moses figure with horns, and he holds the 10 Commandments, the basis of Judaism, our laws. And the other caption reads, he turned the devil into God and God into the world of devil's mockery. And then we have a more modern adaptation of this same message, that Jews are not human, but devils. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Now, when I looked at the one image of a text that you presented, that I have to, it was just on a slide before, you saw a scholar and a Hindu portrayed as an insect. I'll have to, the nayscience. In the text, the cover of the nayscience, there was an insect and a scholar. So if non-Aryans are less than human, it's not that it's just one race is superior. The Jews as non-Aryans were portrayed as less than human, as vermin, as lesser biological beings. And what does one do to vermin? They exterminate them. And even today, that word is used in the description of the cold-blooded murder of 6 million Jewish people. And we see how it turned from words to social ostracization, to loss of jobs, to loss of property, to loss of rights. And if you go to slide 8, when propaganda, when racial theory and anti-Semitism and hate scholarship, this is scholarship, one of the, actually the very first law that Hitler passed was for the universities, telling them to expel Jewish lawyers and get rid of Jewish texts. And the academicians willingly complied. There wasn't a pushback from academia because academia was basically in support, and those who weren't were timid. So we have a propaganda that has cultivated a soil in which racism can thrive. And when propaganda meets opportunity, we found the Holocaust. This religious and racial anti-Semitism didn't end with rhetoric. It ended with massacre of not only 6 million Jews, 1.5 million of them being children, but at least 5 million others in a catastrophe that was so huge that for a moment, I think it stunned the world. And for a while, in polite society, no one was proudly anti-Semitic. But when we look at 1948, 10 months after India declared independence, the Jewish people asserted their sovereignty and announced Israel's independence. This Jewish state was weak and surrounded by much stronger enemies. But then we see that this virus we thought had been eradicated, like the coronavirus, this European anti-Semitism had jumped continents in World War II. The Grand Mufti in Palestine formed very close ties and cooperation with Hitler. The only thing, the Mufti was a little impatient, thinking that Hitler didn't kill the Jews fast enough. The Nazi Germany increased ties with Egypt and other newly created Arab nations. Nazi propaganda was broadcast on radios throughout the Middle East. And after the war, many Nazis fled to Egyptian and other Arab governments, where they brought their media campaigns and anti-Semitic messaging that we find today. We have records of Nazi propagandists who changed their name from a German name to an Arabic sounding name and did the same job in the Middle East that they had done in Europe. But I'm not talking about a history lesson. I'm talking about today. And if we can look at the next slide. The lies still kill. And sometimes I feel the world has learned nothing since 1936 because the war of words continues. You may recognize some of the attacks against Jews as similar to what the Hindus experience. They want to, this picture of the anti-Semitism that has led to massacres. The woman on in the middle is Sarah Halimi, a Holocaust survivor who was beaten up. She was 85 years old. She was beaten up, thrown from the roof of her building and died. The reason she was a Jew. The other image is Ilhan Halimi, not related, a 23-year-old cell phone salesman who was tortured for 28 days and set on fire and died. And the reason? He was a Jew. And what are they doing in the war of words today? They're trying to erase history, as they wanted to erase the photographs and not keep it. There are hundreds of books by respected professors who deny Jewish history and even deny the Holocaust. They are trying to delete religion. Our religious books and institutions, and you understand this, are routinely vandalized and desecrated. When they don't attack the individual Jew, they attack the collective Jew of Israel, and they slander the democracies that are of Israel and India. Here are two democracies in a sea of tyranny, and they are bombarded with false accusations of racism and caste discrimination. They try to silence us. Jews and Hindus who feel connected to their ancient homelands are silenced and marginalized in the media, municipal councils, as you know, recently, academic conferences, and they're same groups who are bullying and harassing Jewish and pro-Israel students are crying that they're not denied the right to speak, and these groups are actively pressuring school administrations to prevent pro-Israel, pro-India speakers from visiting campuses. They want our students to reject their identity, and they're being pressured across the nation. Some of the ethnic studies courses are revising social studies curriculum, and many of the advisory committee members are outwardly anti-Semitic and are conveniently excluding Hindus, especially from India, from the ethnic studies groups. And much of this is done with the propaganda of misleading language. They're saying they're doing this for the good of the world, anti-oppression, anti-colonialism, and young people and others are, and they are falling for it. And the Aryan race theory is back. You see white supremacists across the globe, they started using the word Aryan again to label non-Jewish people. The word also signifies their support for the racist belief and genocidal practices of Nazi Germany. And the outcome is violence and bloodshed. Jews make up just 2% of Americans. But according to the FBI statistics, over 60% of the religiously motivated crimes in the US are directed against Jews. In 2020, Jews experienced near historic levels of anti-Semitism. In a recent article in Insight Higher Education, it reports the harassment and attacks on Jewish students are at an all-time high. Many, or the majority of Jewish students, have at least one time been afraid of publicly displaying their religion. So, if you're not all depressed, I'd like you to look at the next slide.
Yeah. Is this the last slide, Peggy?
This is the last, this is the last slide. And if you look at the demographics of the Hindu and Jewish communities, we stand out almost everywhere. We stand out in education, innovation, women's rights, average household income. So we together can figure it out. And what I propose is unity and clarity. We need to control our own story and the definition of anti-Semitism and Hinduphobia, and not leave it up to someone else. And we need to have unity and work together, because I truly believe that united and clear, we will prevail.
Thank you. Thank you so much. These are powerful, powerful stories. And I'm almost, uh, you know, hesitant to actually break into this conversation, but the demand of the hour is that we do, and bring it to a close soon. We did start a little bit late, so we're, with permission from our next set of panelists, Suhagji and Prakashji and Kalyanji, if we could take extra 5 minutes for a couple of questions. We would love to do that. Otherwise, we would move on. So sounds like we have a nod from our, next panelists and Kalyanji. So there are two questions that we have. One is a lot of Hindus in the West, particularly, believe that because they are so successful in their professional, positions, and they are doing such a great, making such a great contribution to the society, they are somehow insulated or will be insulated from the effects of, these nasty movements. Coming from the Jewish experience, Peggy, if you could just address and disabuse us of that notion for a minute, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, we thought the same way, especially the Jews of Germany. They were in places in the government, senior positions in the military, respected, world-renowned professors, researchers, the greatest thinkers, musicians. And in a minute, they believed we are Germans, we're Jewish, but we're German. In a minute, the racist ideology took everything away. And for those who weren't able to flee, took their lives. It's a comforting illusion that our prosperity and education defend us, but it's an illusion.
Thank you. Thank you.